Have you ever noticed how easy it is to live an entire year on autopilot? You wake up to an alarm that feels more like a command than a choice. You reach for your phone before your feet touch the floor. You scan emails, headlines, notifications, other people's priorities flooding your nervous system before your own thoughts even have a chance to form. You move from obligation to obligation. You perform competence. You answer questions. You meet expectations. And at night, when the house finally grows quiet, there is a faint but persistent ache beneath the surface of your life. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is simply the feeling that you are slightly out of alignment with yourself. This is the story of a boy who lived that way for years, and of the morning he finally stopped running. His name was Ethan. He was not reckless or irresponsible. In fact, he was reliable in the way modern adults are trained to be. He showed up to work on time. He met deadlines. He paid his bills. He kept his commitments. If you looked at his life from the outside, you would see stability. But if you looked closer, if you watched him pause just a second too long in front of the bathroom mirror at night, you would see a question in his eyes he never spoke out loud. When did I stop feeling connected to my own life? Ethan's exhaustion was not physical. It was existential. He wasn't tired because he lacked sleep. He was tired because he lacked space. Every hour of his day belonged to someone or something else. His employer, his clients, his inbox, the endless scroll of curated lives on his screen. He had opinions about politics, productivity, fitness, and finance, but most of them were borrowed. He had goals once, but they had been buried under convenience and distraction. He told himself that someday he would reset. When work slowed down, when things felt less chaotic, when he felt more motivated. But motivation never arrived in the form he expected. Instead, there was only a quiet restlessness that followed him from Monday into Sunday and back again. The turning point did not come from a crisis. There was no dramatic failure, no rock bottom. It came in the most ordinary way, through a conversation. One evening, he met an old friend for coffee. Daniel had always been ambitious in college, but what struck Ethan now was not ambition. It was steadiness. Daniel listened fully. He did not rush to fill silence. He seemed rooted in himself. Ethan asked him what had changed. Daniel thought for a moment and said, "I stopped surrendering my mornings." It sounded almost trivial, but Daniel explained that for the past year, he had been waking up before the world demanded anything from him. Not to hustle harder, not to optimize every minute, simply to sit, to think, to write, to move his body, to be alone with his own thoughts before the noise began. "That's where I found myself again," Daniel said quietly. The phrase unsettled Ethan. Found myself again. The implication was clear. Somewhere along the way, he had misplaced himself. That night, Ethan set his alarm for 5:30 a.m. He did not make a grand declaration. He did not post about it. He simply made a decision no one else would witness. When the alarm rang, his body resisted immediately. His mind began its negotiation. You need more rest. You were up late. You can start tomorrow. The arguments were logical, persuasive, familiar. For a few seconds, he hovered between two identities, the version of himself that always postponed change and the version that acted despite discomfort. It struck him then that growth is rarely a dramatic leap. It is usually a quiet refusal to repeat an old pattern. He sat up. Nothing extraordinary happened in that moment. The world did not shift, but something internal did. He had interrupted the script. The room was still dark. The silence felt almost foreign. He made coffee without checking his phone. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at a blank notebook. For several minutes, he felt restless, unproductive, exposed. Without the usual digital anesthesia, his thoughts rose to the surface unfiltered. He began to write, not eloquently, not strategically, just honestly. What do I want? The question frightened him more than any deadline ever had, because answering it required accountability. It required admitting that some of his dissatisfaction was not caused by circumstance, but by avoidance. In that first week, he did not solve his life. He did not discover a hidden talent or launch a new business. What he discovered instead was how uncomfortable it felt to be alone with his unedited thoughts. He saw the fears he had disguised as busyness. Fear of failing publicly, fear of leaving the safety of predictability, fear that if he truly tried, he might discover his limits. But something else emerged too. Clarity. He realized he had been mistaking stimulation for fulfillment. The constant stream of information had given him the illusion of engagement without the substance of growth. In the quiet of early morning, without performance or distraction, he began to differentiate between what he consumed and what he actually valued. By the second week, he added a short walk before sunrise. The air was cold against his skin. The streets were nearly empty. He noticed details he had ignored for years. The way light gradually softened the horizon, the rhythm of his own breathing, the subtle steadiness that comes from moving without urgency. He began stretching, then running short distances, not to transform his body, but to experience discipline as a form of self-respect. He read 10 pages of a book each morning, not for speed or status, but for depth. He wrote reflections. Some days were profound, many were mundane, but each morning reinforced a new identity. He was someone who kept a promise to himself. There were failures, mornings when he hit snooze, weeks when fatigue won. But instead of collapsing into self-criticism, he returned to the practice. That return, he realized, was more powerful than perfection. Integrity is not built by flawless execution. It is built by recommitment. After a month, nothing about his external life had radically changed. He still worked the same job. He still faced the same pressures. But he no longer felt entirely owned by them. He had carved out a boundary in time that belonged exclusively to him. That hour was not about productivity metrics. It was about alignment. And alignment changed the way he moved through the rest of the day. He responded to conflict with more patience. He made decisions more deliberately. He began exploring long-postponed goals with measured courage. The morning practice did not magically remove uncertainty. It strengthened his capacity to face it. One morning, standing outside as the sky shifted from indigo to gold, he felt something he had not felt in years: congruence. His actions matched his intentions. His time reflected his values. He was no longer waiting for permission or perfect conditions. He was participating in his own life again. In that stillness, he understood that the true power of an early morning was not about the hour itself. It was about ownership. The world constantly competes for your attention, but your identity is shaped by what you give consistent time to. When you claim the first moments of your day, you signal to yourself more than anyone else that your inner life matters. He had not become wealthier overnight. He had not eliminated struggle. What he had gained was subtler and more durable: self-trust. Each early morning was evidence that he could act in alignment with his values even when no one was watching. And self-trust, once built, becomes the foundation for every larger decision. The boy did not meet a new version of himself. He met the one who had been there all along, buried under noise and postponement. He discovered that clarity is not granted by circumstance. It is cultivated by solitude. Courage is not born in crowds. It is forged in private moments of choice. Maybe you do not need to wake at 5:30 a.m. Maybe your schedule looks different. But somewhere in your day, there must be a space that belongs entirely to you. A space without performance, without comparison, without digital interruption. A space where you confront the honest question of who you are becoming. Because the real transformation does not begin when the world changes. It begins when you stop negotiating with your own potential. It begins when you decide that even one small, consistent act of discipline is worth more than another year of quiet dissatisfaction. The true power of an early morning is not productivity. It is presence. It is the courage to sit with yourself long enough to recognize both your fear and your possibility. And in that recognition, to choose again and again to move toward the life that feels like your own.